to this evening's thinking, where we'll be asking, are NFTs a pyramid scheme? But I think more than just trying to decide this was quite a heavily semantic question. We do also want to get to a better understanding as a group of what NFTs actually are, how they stand to affect the creative industries, how they stand to influence the future of the internet, and a whole raft of other questions. Because I personally, and I think, or maybe people in the room are coming to this with not like a huge amount of prior knowledge. It's something that we want to learn about. I don't know, not a huge amount of prior. So that's part of the aim of the thinking, is to take a complex, difficult subject and to arrive at a better point of understanding about it. And I think this is not only a complicated but important subject, because I mean, in the past few weeks we've seen no shortage of those, but there is definitely one in this. A CryptoPunk, an image of a man smoking in a blue bandana, supposedly worth $200,000, was donated to the embattled Ukrainian government to help fund resistance against the Russian invasion. And when I first read about that, I thought, what on earth is going on? So that might be a subject that we get back to, but as I said, hopefully we'll reach a better point of understanding, and we as a newsroom will have learned something about what we need to go away and investigate. I'm very glad to be joined by Dan Olsen, hopefully, who will be able to dial in. I know he was having some issues with his camera, who's a video essayist and the creator of Line Goes Up, The Problem with NFTs. Excellent. It looks like we have Dan. Welcome, Dan. Also to Alexandra Art, who I think is joining us momentarily. She will be in that seat there, hopefully, in a moment. Who's the co-founder of Electric Artifacts, which is an agency for curatorial advice surrounding digital art, which is something I'll have to ask her about. And to Georgi Chilikov, who is a private equity and venture capital director. So I think with this conversation, as with many others, it will be important to start with a bit of a shared definition of what NFTs are, and it would certainly be for my benefit that we could start with that. So I don't know, Dan, if you're able to hear me, could you give us a quick starter for 10, like what is an NFT?
So an NFT is it's a non-fungible token. It's basically a small digital object that is tracked on a cryptocurrency blockchain. So so it's distinguished from the tokens that, like the monetary tokens on the blockchain, the currency tokens on the blockchain, by being non-fungible. So like a book, you could rip a book in half, but the two halves of the book aren't the same half of the book. So each token, it's not directly it's not directly equivalent to another one, and it can't be subdivided or funged.
Yeah. Right, but it can certainly look like another one. It just won't be that same one.
Yeah, everyone has a unique identifier, so they are strictly unique, even if they're not functionally unique.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. And Georgi, what does NFT mean? Something different to you, or is that pretty much how you see it?
Look, I think NFT can mean a lot of things. I'll give 3 examples, and I think probably also get to ask people around what they think. So first is proofs possession of something you can't really touch. It gives people a digitally native way to invest in culture in the internet space, right? So that until recently, it was difficult for people to, well, what do I do with this? I can't really touch it. I paid so much money for it. But now, if you think about the various metaverses, you can actually go and find an application for it there. And the third one is internet as you know it today. It's a big copy-paste machine. So there's a lot of abundance of all of the same, and there's no differentiation of what's mine, what's yours, what's different. Lots of JPEGs and all the rest of it. I think NFTs can do, in contrast, they can give the ability to create digital scarcity of something.
Digital scarcity.
So, there are only 10,000 of one thing, and there are only 5,000 of another thing. So that's what it creates, really. And back to the point earlier mentioned, it's non-fungible, so that kind of summarizes.
Excellent. So with that as a working definition, I think there's a question that emerges from that example I cited about donation to the Ukrainian government that begs the question, how have they come to be worth so much? $200,000 for, I don't know if anybody's seen it, a little image of someone wearing a bandana in 8-bit smoking a cigarette. And your background in finance, I thought potentially you could help us with some of that kind of thinking. How has the market arrived at a place where that can be worth $200,000?
So I think there's certainly an element of scarcity. There's certainly an element of interest. Obviously, if we go back to traditional finance, there is supply and demand, and there's more of one than less of the other. That impacts the price in one direction or another. So I think that's what really drives it. I think when there are more people trying to buy something that's not enough of, that just creates more value, even momentarily or for a longer term.
So within that kind of the traditional supply and demand relationship, it is curious to me still that you see NFT series reach the 1000th version of a particular theme, or I was looking at one that was the 44th rock that had been created, an image of a rock that the seller unfortunately had missold, but they thought it was worth $1.2 million. How does the scarcity piece map with the fact that people create sort of version after version after version in the same series of NFTs?
From my perspective, I think that it's very complex to try and understand still the behavior of the people who actually create the demand rather than the supply. So I think it's coming from there. But I think because news these days travels so fast, so far, I think it's very easy to find value. It's very easy to actually generate value in the eyes of the audience.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what's triggering as well. Something very unique, or something that's just the 44th of 100, and that's the one. I think there is certain elements of, as well, kind of the right time, the right person looking at it.
Right. So the element of scarcity is maintained because of that number in the series, even though it's just a sort of, it can look like a slightly different version of the same theme of NFT.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, sorry, please, I was to say first, welcome, Alexandra.
The chiefs are overloaded.
Yeah, you joined us very gracefully. Welcome. If you want to jump in on that point, that would be excellent.
I think I missed the first part of the question. You were mentioning scarcity.
Well, I started at the top by saying that it was curious to me and very interesting that we'd seen reports of an NFT being donated to the Ukrainian government to help finance resistance against the Russian invasion, and that NFT had reached a value of $200,000. I know, and as we saw in the slides, that some of them reach a greater value than that. But I was interested in the question of how. How did it reach that value? And so Georgie was talking about scarcity. But
I see. As opposed to the traditional value, it would fetch from the marketplace.
Well, I mean, I suppose so. But also, it was curious that something so unassuming to some people can be so valuable to others.
Yeah, I think the idea of value is a very contested topic, especially in the NFT space. So partially, it comes as no surprise in the traditional art world, this quality of provenance is transferred into the NFT world. So for example, if an NFT, like a punk, that was a famous example of something donated, is donated, so it has that history, that momentum that people can associate with. And that's often the same in the traditional art market that brings the value. And also people tend to spend more money when they know that it's going towards the actual cause, as opposed to just speculation.
Yeah. So I think that point makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't necessarily explain the wider market where NFTs are not being donated for a particular cause or used for a particular action. They're just being bought and sold, and people are sort of speculating on that value. And it certainly feels to me like that speculation has just spiraled up and up and up in terms of value. And it feels difficult to account for why, but do you think it's roughly the same logic, that they're scarce and therefore if there's demand, the price will go up?
I can bring an example, Relief. So that's a project we launched on this first day of war where we raised $1 million in the first 30 seconds. And I'll be honest with you, we did not expect such demand. But we did bring together, what it created is created a momentum, a shared experience that everyone wanted to be a part of. And it allowed us to onboard artists who wouldn't necessarily give a work to charity unless there was a long conversation. So within, I would say, 24 hours, our team assimilated some of the top artists in the NFT space. And I think that created an element so people who wouldn't traditionally buy charity works, for them it was an opportunity to buy an edition because we were giving large editions from a famous artist. But at the same time, I think a lot of us, when the crisis started, were feeling helpless. I myself included, having family back home. And we wanted to do something, we wanted to contribute in a structural way. And this allowed people who were used to already buying and selling NFTs to do it through a vehicle that they already knew about. They had the crypto to donate. Many Ukrainian funds didn't have even a Ethereum or blockchain address at the time. So it was up to us really to distribute that fund and work with the governments to find the best ways to get it across.
So, but the majority of NFT sales and transactions, they're not taking place in the context of sort of crisis aid or financing good causes. They're taking place as more of a sort of mainstream market. And I wondered, Dan, if we could just go to you on whether that sort of logic makes sense, that there's scarcity of supply of these NFT series, whether they have versions or not, and whether that accounts for the sort of spiraling prices that we're seeing.
No. The logic driving the market, the scarcity is largely illusory and exists basically as, little more than rhetoric. There's just not a lot of meat to the idea that, like, oh yeah, it's because they're scarce, that's why people are getting really excited about them. It's because, like, so that just gets thrown around as a buzzword. There's a much more like bare bones reason driving the price, which is that cryptocurrency exists in this nebulous, unspendable bubble where you have these whales who have been holding on to just vast hordes of it that are irrationally priced at just arbitrarily high numbers, and they've been sitting on it for so long that they can interact with these NFT marketplaces with just these truly absurd sounding numbers that have no bearing on reality because they're playing with house money. You have guys who got into Ethereum 6-7 years ago who have hundreds of thousands of it. And so if you're coming in now and you're trying to participate in a market that's operating on like, ooh, a CryptoPunk is 90 Ethereum, he doesn't care. Like that's chump change to him. So that's ultimately what is really driving these prices, is that there is no actual connection to value. So you're able to just like make these numbers up.
And is that to say, Dan, that no one ever cashes out of these NFT collections and therefore uses that money to buy real things, houses, cars, useful stuff?
People cash out, but it's a very difficult scale to really wrap your head around, like what the differences in operating levels. So there's a lot of artists who do deal with who deal with NFTs, and they deal with it on like very regular, like private individual levels of money. You're talking like thousands, maybe even like tens of thousands of dollars. And on that level, like, yeah, people cash in, they cash out on a somewhat regular basis. But the market as a whole, the thing that's really driving the headline setting numbers, the Beeple sale, the price of CryptoPunks, the price of Bored Ape Yacht Club, those numbers are operating because you have this way, like you have this essentially legacy wealth among the longtime holders who just hold truly like staggering volumes of Ether or Bitcoin or Tezos or Cardano or Solana or whatever.
Right. So I guess, and please do if you'd like to respond.
I was one of the first users of NFTs on Tezos, actually. Back then, I wouldn't say they were whales because everything cost about $5. So I remember buying some art for $5 and in a couple of months it reaching tens of thousands. So I did meet a lot of people who started really low. And to be honest, when you start collecting, like, there are people who maybe come for speculation, but one of the main drivers, being someone in the digital art world for the last 5 years before even NFTs came about, to me was the connection with the artist. And like, you're able to own pieces by an artist that you always admired, and all of a sudden you have a direct relationship with them. And I think that's a lot of headlines and discussions are focused around collectibles markets. So like Bored Apes or the Rocks or CryptoKitties. But many people ignore the fact that art existed for such a long time. Like, digital art existed since the late 50s. And this is just an opportunity for these artists to actually monetize on their creations. And apart from arts and collectibles, there are many other utilities and tokens that you can apply NFT knowledge to. So you have like virtual worlds, you have in-game assets, you have access pass tokens. Essentially, it's a technology that enables many relationships through digital assets.
Yeah, I would like to get back to that point you made, Dan, about the necessity of speculating or transacting around this stuff in cryptocurrency as opposed to anything else. But I really apologize. I should have said at the start, despite saying that we were trying to reach a better understanding of this topic together, that please do weigh in. Everybody in the room, obviously, we'd love to hear what you have to say, what you think. There's a microphone here that someone will be able to bring round. Would that be Liz?
I'm very happy.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just put your hand up, catch my eye if you'd like to say anything. But it would also be great to go to Paramveer Kumar, who's made a point in the chat. If you're there, Paramveer, it'd be great to hear from you. But I think it relates, at least in part, to the point you were just making, Alexandra, about forming a relationship with an artist or a creator through your ability to buy these NFTs. Are you there?
Hello. Hi there.
Do you want to make your point?
Yeah, so there's some artists that I know. I mean, The Weeknd, I guess, will be the most prominent one. And a couple of years ago on a platform called Rarible, I believe, The Weeknd, he released a couple of NFT images, which, all right, I'm personally not interested in, but the concept that I found really interesting was he created this NFT song where maybe he only had one copy of it. And, you know, for me as a major fan, that seemed like a really interesting way for me to take part. There's some artists that release NFT albums where there's about 100 copies. They're a bit more, you know, financially achievable for even someone like me. And I guess it's, if you extend it to, you know, smaller artists, it can be a very good way of financially contributing as well. If you're, you know, a small indie artist, you know, release an NFT version. Yeah, it can be an interesting way of.
Right. Katie, yes, please.
I just want to pick up on that point and also Alexandra's point, which is I came into this room thinking that NFTs was all this sort of speculation, money, the headlines. But my reaction to listening to you is it feels like the fan clubs of like today, like it's like a belonging, a relationship. You've used emotional words far more than financial kind of constructs and concepts. And I just think that's quite an interesting point because I had come into this room thinking very much like, I'm looking at our friend who was at the cryptocurrency one, which is like it's all speculation. And I loved what Dan was saying about, oh, you know, if you've got loads of money at the beginning, then it's fine. You're just having fun and you're making all these headlines. But beyond the headlines, I'm just interested in this concept of belonging relationships. It's not what I had assumed NFTs were for or about.
Please.
Yeah, I can add to that. I was speaking to, I forgot your name, sorry, Liz. I come from the traditional art world, and right now I work for like the biggest online physical art marketplace called Artsy. But they probably don't want me to be speaking on their behalf, so you don't need to quote that as an Artsy. But I had a really slow transition as being somebody who studied art history, was kind of working in literally a Mayfair gallery, selling Leger's, Picasso's, Miro's, like the most traditional thing that you can imagine. And I was really slow to come into the NFT space because I thought like, oh my God, no way. This is so, I just don't understand it. It's so kind of financial. It's so technical. It's like all these things that I don't understand because I'm an art historian, first and foremost. And I'm here to like represent artists in the traditional world. But it took me about 2 or 3 years of really just hearing about it and then meeting Alexandra and really kind of learning to see that it's twofold. There's two really exciting things about it. The first thing is that it allows artists to finally have ownership in a way that they haven't ever before. As in, maybe they did like in the 1920s or something, but it really allows an artist who, so in the past, if you're a contemporary artist, you always have to find a gallerist, like Gaussian or somebody else to represent you. And it's a very hard and arduous process, and it's effectively very gatekeepery. So there's just a lot of, yeah. But now you can upload it, you can mint it, you can create your own piece and effectively engage directly with your audience and get all the royalties. And the second part is it's a whole new medium for artists to create, akin to basically like the 1920s in Paris when they were kind of looking for this whole new moment for them to launch a new way of making, basically. So.
That's interesting. So just to your first point about a mode of ownership and the difference between that, what we're seeing now, and the galleries, is it about ownership or is it about access and the ability to sort of have a platform? Because I kind of see those things as slightly different. If we were talking about a situation in which an artist was actually sort of robbed of the entitlement to say, I own this piece of artwork, as opposed to having to jump through hoops and get access and sort of ingratiate themselves with people in order to be shown in a gallery, those feel like quite different things. And I don't know which one of those we'd argue NFTs maybe solves.
Maybe, Alexandra, do you want to take that question?
I would say, I wouldn't say it has to solve something. I would say it provides opportunities for something. So at the beginning, like 2019, if you looked at the market, it was really small, and 50% of the artists were buying from other artists. So it was essentially, it started off as a community supporting each other. And as someone who never took pride, like I always considered myself more like a business person in the art world, I also did my own works. And when people started buying my own works, when I was just experimenting with NFTs, I was like, oh my God. And like I connected with so many people, and then other artists introduce you to someone else. And it's a way of basically finding your customers.
Yeah.
But I think more than that, it's also a way to be independent of the structures that the traditional market offers. And it's just unfortunate because many people talk about NFTs in a way that, I don't know, a food critic would talk about food without ever trying it. And I think that a lot of people, when they think about NFTs, it's like they talk about the ingredients, they talk about the production, the market, but they don't actually try it and try to engage with the community and see like what it takes to collect. Because collecting, it doesn't mean you have to pay like 10 or 20 Ethereum. Like if you shop on Tezos, there's amazing art by like the leading artists starting at $2-3, you know, like anyone can try it. Like the access is relatively open compared to the traditional world as well.
Yeah.
And I hate saying this, but I do get interviewed by journalists who write for major publications, and they ask me questions that I would expect them to ask a year ago. So the amount of research that goes into writing these articles and documentaries about NFTs, it's all a bit more clickbaity, unfortunately, because for majority of people, it's much easier to deny a new technology than to try and embrace and understand it. That's why the narrative is heavily dominated by this angle.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are rightly trying to reach an understanding of, we wouldn't say that there are no risks of harm and no risks of criminality, even if you look, for example, at just sort of the recent track record of scams and rug pulls and things based around the idea of NFT collections. So I think people are trying to come to a kind of reasoned conclusion about it. But I would say, if it was possible to get Jill F. To speak, just making a point about all of the variety of ways you can support artists. Are you there, Jill? If we can't, no problem at all. If we can't get Jill, if we could ask Simon Nazar, get him lined up, that would be great. I wanted to pick up a point with Dan. about whether we're kind of, just in the piece we've just discussed about supporting artists, making NFT purchases at a low level rather than high price tag. Does it seem to you, Dan, that we maybe need to think about the NFT market and the phenomenon as a whole in two parts? This sort of big whale, like crazy sums, and then the more, I don't know if you could call it a grassroots approach to purchases?
No, I think the ethical way of thinking about it is really to start from first principles, which is that NFTs exist as an outgrowth of cryptocurrency, and thus they inherit a lot of political implications and baggage from that very basic association. And then if you want to indulge in compartmentalization, then sure, you can segment it into talking about, kind of the like Hickhead Nunce Tezos community that persists in a sort of fascinating null zone between failure and success. And then like the bake system. But
what do you mean by that, Dan?
Oh, Tezos is kind of fascinating. So Tezos came out of the gate during the big like ICO offering in 2017, but oh boy, it's a very long story about how like the evolution of Tezos is fraught with like a lot of problems and internal drama and conflict between the founders, and a big scandal around like their initial coin offering. And so, but they haven't quite, they didn't succeed in the way that like Ethereum has, or even like Solana, but they also didn't fail in the way that like Atom did. They didn't, there's thousands of just like completely discarded coins from the, like literally thousands of completely discarded coins from the like big ICO craze. And so Tezos, the fact that it's still like in use, and like limping along on a certain degree, that's like very fascinating. I find it really, really interesting because it has created this sort of weird sub community that is almost functional. The prices do stay like low. It does stay like somewhat accessible, but that's like very tenuous, because if Tezos did then see success, if it did see like crypto success and adoption from like, if the Ethereum whale started migrating over, that little community would be just annihilated overnight by the like shifts in the currency, by the instability that would be introduced by that change. And yet, like, yeah, so it's just kind of in this nebulous little niche where it's this interesting little sub community. I'm fascinated by like what goes on Tezos because it's so precarious and yet almost works. Sorry, what was I saying before?
If I could just put the point that you made at the start there, Dan, to Georgie and also to Alexandra. Do you see what's going on with the buying, trading of NFTs as is it necessarily an outgrowth of what we're seeing with cryptocurrency more generally, the speculation on cryptocurrency?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I guess it depends who you're paying attention to, because you have hundreds of thousands of wallets, and when you talk about whales, maybe there's 100 of them, but not all of them came from the cryptocurrency background, not all of them collect NFTs. So I see them honestly as really separate, because you can see NFTs as an extension of art, because essentially all NFTs that we're talking about in terms of like the arts category, it's all made by artists. So they attract other artists or traditional collectors or collectors online. There are some crypto traders that start collecting art. What's interesting that I start seeing is people start with speculating on collectibles, but then once they accumulated enough ETH, they actually go and buy artworks by leading artists. So it's almost like a prestige status to own something by a big artist. But for artists, it's important to maintain their career as well, because they can't keep selling to the same buyer. So for them to grow, naturally, they develop a bigger audience of collectors. They start releasing editions so that those are more affordable on Ethereum, Solana, You even have NFTs on Bitcoins, the rare pepes, like maybe people heard about them. I can talk about rare pepes because it's a whole new sort of community of its own with different price availabilities. But that's also a really interesting example of how a community has grown.
Yeah.
And I'll just make 2 points. So I think from my perspective and just kind of more like traditional banking finance, the way I see it is in 2021, probably the NFTs served as a kind of a catalyst to kind of a more wider adoption of cryptocurrencies across various.
As a catalyst too.
Yeah, as a catalyst.
Right.
I think there is certainly a connection, as Dan mentioned, but I don't agree to full extent that some of the whales were there. I think actually the whales are coming in now in NFTs. And if you look at
just for clarity, in case anybody in the room doesn't know what a whale is, someone who holds a lot of a particular crypto or a range of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, and I think we also need to differentiate between kind of a patient, smart money whales and impatient, not so smart money whales.
Right.
Or kind of, I think the latter are trying to kind of get people in who think that they're late and try to sell what they had. And there's a lot of patient money that actually starting now. So the giants that once 30 years ago had to convince us that Atari, Yahoo, Apple, HP, and some other technology company are going to be relevant in the long term. These same guys now are raising millions and to some extent billions of funds, some of them for crypto, and there's also recently a 30 million fund just for NFTs by people who've been in the market for as long as 50 years. Funds like Sequoia and some other less known. But so there is certain aspect that maybe they know what they're doing, and a lot of people aspire to what they do.
Yeah.
So I think these guys are coming in, and they're coming in and they're saying, well, I'm in for 10 years. I'm in for the long run.
Yeah.
I believe that this market, there's some M&A activity now happening. There's some consolidation happening as well. That's a good sign. There are people who believe and transact that these billions of valuation maybe will correct, but I think 50 funds focused on cryptocurrency that were born in 2021.
Yeah.
I think that means something for people in the industry, perhaps.
Yeah, I can see Dan's got his hand back up, so I'll give you the chance to just come back on that if you'd like, Dan.
Yeah, so I don't think it depends on who you're paying attention to, because like the simple material reality is that like these NFTs aren't just a thing that is principally traded for in cryptocurrency, like that's just some like quirky relationship that's organically evolved. They are built of the same stuff as cryptocurrency. They are built into the chains. They are a function of the chains themselves. The two are homoousian. They are of the same stuff. So it is irresponsible to compartmentalize the two away from each other and treat trading in NFTs as somehow uniquely distinct from trading in cryptocurrency and uniquely isolated from the ideology of cryptocurrency. And as to like the whales coming in late, you are seeing like Sequoia and like, big traditional funds coming in, but that doesn't mean that like the whales were coming in late. Fars and Fard was a major driver of the big meme, the big meme purchases back in early 2021. At A was also a big whale purchaser. You've got Andreessen Horowitz, who have obviously been deeply entrenched in this scene for years. You've got the Winklevoss twins, who have been active in crypto and NFTs since 2011. Like it's I think irresponsible to dismiss the like actual practical history of these things and the practical connections between them.
Right. Thanks.
But I think I certainly agree with all that, Dan. The only thing I would say is there hasn't been a case before kind of 2021 where people will try to pour money into HNF, and Sequoia and some other ones. So I think Anderson Horowitz, you mentioned, I think they might have been involved to some extent, but right now we're seeing them raising conventional funds from wider institutional investors actually, and that's what I mean by kind of the smart, patient money, big whales coming in as an observation.
Yeah, but I suppose that doesn't necessarily address for the people who have as Dan mentioned, a sort of ideological issue with the way that cryptocurrencies are being portrayed. they might still see NFTs and cryptocurrencies as intrinsically linked.
Well, certainly they are.
Yeah. So I should say at this point, I've let it run on a little bit long, but we would typically have what we call a slowdown, which is a really brief break in the thinking for people to sort of turn to the people next to them, have a bit of a chat about what we've heard so far, and see if in the next bit we can ask some more questions, and and we'll carry on. So that'll be about 2 minutes. Okay, thanks everyone. I wanted to see if we could start out this second section with just two sort of observations, stories that I've found, potentially only one actually, because I think it gets to the point. Relatively recently, OpenSea, which is a platform for trading in, buying and listing NFTs, blocked all Iranian users, not just users who were in Iran, but users who had previously been domiciled in Iran or could be identified as Iranian. And they said that was because they didn't allow users or territories that were on the US sanctions list to operate on the platform. But they did it at what appeared to be quite a random time. Obviously, Iran has been on the sanctions list for much longer than the time, than that period, and OpenSea appeared to sort of block them out of the blue. And to me, that smacked a little bit of a sort of anti-free expression and trading, and I guess sort of anti the philosophy that I've heard lots of people say NFTs and cryptocurrencies embody. And I wondered what you made, Alexandra, of the idea that there are actually some platforms out here in the world, leaving the artists and traders and things aside, but platforms who do act as gatekeepers for some of this economy, and they're going to make decisions in much the same way, it appears, as governments do. What do you think that means for how NFTs work and how they function to the effect you were describing earlier of supporting artists being this sort of free expression?
Well, I think OpenSea is a good example because it's one of the major platforms out there, but they're very centralized in the sense like the way they raise funds. It's not traditionally through tokens, like many other crypto exchanges do, but actually they raise the traditional way. So they do follow the regulations and they're very tight. But in blockchain, there's this idea of forking. So essentially, you can replicate platforms, you can replicate many different things. So that's why once a Tezos-based platform got shut down, the next day there was the same one. There were actually 20 same ones. Same thing with OpenSea. Like on one hand, it did this. On the other hand, has anyone heard about LooksRare? So LooksRare was a competitor. Well, they positioned themselves as a competitor to OpenSea, and what they did is they just gave an airdrop, a free airdrop, depending on your trading volume on OpenSea of tokens. So people like in a day made from $50,000 to $100,000 just because they traded in OpenSea. But all they had to do is register on LooksRare, and the next day, like, majority of the collections were in LooksRare. So when things like this happen, like in the traditional world, like for example in gaming, like if Fortnite would shut down tomorrow, you lose all your assets, like you're doomed. Like everything you worked for is pretty much gone. But if OpenSea closes for all of us, we still have all our NFTs that we can just go and trade on any other platform.
And for the average person, would that be possible? Or would you need
anyone,
to work out a big, is there a sort of technical challenge if OpenSea?
NFTs are in your wallet. They're not on OpenSea. Like the only issue can be, and that's why many people talk about now, they tell artists to create their own smart contracts. Because when you create an NFT, where the data is stored of the image can vary. So it can be on-chain, but many people don't know much about it, and there are solutions to have it cheaply affordable, but it's not so widely used. Or it can be hosted on a decentralized, in a decentralized way, or it can be hosted by the platform provider. So in the case of OpenSea, if you created your own NFT on OpenSea, it's probably not the best practice, because if something happens to OpenSea, there might be a problem with your data. If you created your own smart contract, you're sort of in control of where the image is hosted, and then and that's what majority of so-called blue chip collections are doing. They create their own smart contract, and if OpenSea closes down tomorrow, a user can just send it directly from wallet to another, or they can just go to any other Ethereum-based alternative platform and continue doing the same amounts of trading they're doing.
Interesting. There was a contribution here from Molly White saying that doesn't sound like forking. It sounds like creating a new platform. But I don't know, Molly, do you want to make your point and maybe raise that yourself? You got Molly?
Hi.
Hi there.
It wasn't really a huge point. It's just that forking the blockchain is something very different. And that typically means actually creating a new blockchain that's based on something like Ethereum, whereas creating a new platform like LooksRare versus OpenSea is actually building on the same blockchain. So it's the same underlying data, it's just a different platform.
Actually, I would say that's not exactly correct. So it doesn't have to be a new blockchain. You can have on this. So I worked in the gaming company where we're creating a decentralized game engine, and the way our basically technology worked is that you can create any experience built on the same platform, and by forking you essentially replicate it. So in the example of Tezos I gave, they created an exactly the same platform in a matter of days, and that wouldn't be possible to create from scratch if they weren't using the same code.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you've put an intriguing comment in the chat that says, do you want to explain what you mean?
Oh boy, do I have some comments there. Okay, so I'm going to second with Molly that what they did is not forking. Forking is something very specific. All they did was they took an open source code base and replicated it in a new repository. It's just duplication. It's not forking. Forking is something very specific. Second, I just want to point to a rhetorical trick that Alexandra just took with Let's Rare, or with LooksRare, which is this like, oh, they airdropped all of these tokens. These people, like, they made $10,000 to $100,000 just by being active on OpenSea. That's not what happened. They didn't just get money. They were given a token with a theoretical value that they could trade for crypto that they could then sell for dollars. They didn't just, this money didn't just come out of nowhere. It comes from somewhere. The tokens are come out of nowhere. The tokens are invented out of thin air. The airdropped tokens, those came from nothing. They did not just magically give people $100,000. So like, that's a very common rhetorical trick that you see in cryptocurrency, where the actual realities of value get obfuscated behind all of these like conversion processes that have very real, actual, like material, like steps that need to be taken in order to be taken advantage of. These people did not just get airdropped $100,000. They got airdropped an asset with a theoretical value that required at least 2 conversion steps to turn into actual spendable currency.
Right. And so can you envisage a world in which that, you're calling them rhetorical devices, but dispelling with that language, are there mechanisms there that you think are actually like worthwhile? Or I guess circling back to the question.
No, I think like, I mean, I made a 2-hour video on this stat. Like, basically, one, this area doesn't function in the way that the rhetoric makes it sound like. The rhetoric very much overstates how valuable and functional it is. And 2, on an ideological level, I think the vast majority of what it's trying to do, this whole relationship of like tokenizing all of these relationships, this whole thing of basically creating thousands and thousands of competing currencies that only have very specific limited uses and contexts, and they can be very easily bricked by something going out of business. She used the example of Fortnite. Like, just because you have a game token that is an NFT that can be traded, if the NFT version of Fortnite shuts down, those tokens still get bricked. Yes, you could in theory like trade them, but they're worthless because their value exists within a specific context. So you have all of this like very overstated rhetoric. Oh, earlier Jorg said something about like, it's like, oh, you can use them in the metaverses. And my immediate reaction was just like, what metaverses are you talking about? Which software are you talking about? What platforms are you actually talking about? Are you talking about Decentraland? Are you talking about Meta? Are you talking about the Sandbox? Like, what does that mean? You can't just say metaverses as though they're all like interchangeable and compatible. So there's, yeah. Is there a version on the other side of this? But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, the ones you mentioned, it's what was behind my. I didn't mean to use them interchangeably, but.
No, but I think what George also referred to is virtual worlds, because there's only one metaverse. It's like calling the internet many internets. Like there's one metaverse within which many virtual worlds exist.
And that's something that you think, or you envisage in the future as a potential use case?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, again, just being here as, trying to meet expectations from Dan's side as well, because he's really, I don't have anything in front of me. No, I'm joking. No, I'm just trying to explain, I'm trying to marry personal opinion with what I hear from the traditional conventional banking finance world and how people are starting to kind of baby steps. Oh, what could we do with this thing we just paid, 10,000? I cannot really touch it. Oh, now I could do this with it. I could go into Decentraland, or what is Decentraland? And I could use it there, or I could show it there, or I could transfer it from. That's what I meant when you kind of giving perspective of people that are still not even owners of an NFT, but maybe next month they will be. That's how they think today. And so that's what I was kind of like referring to. What is an NFT in the beginning of the conversation?
Yeah. I would, just before we finish, time's running on, like to get Liz. We'll hear from Liz
Your
first.
question will be better than mine. I was just going to ask. I'd love to hear from Dan, scary voice with disembodied voice, and from Alexandra, who's coming at this from different perspectives. I would like to know what will happen in the next 2 years with this marketplace, because I think that their outlook will be very different. I'd love to know what comes next. And your best question.
Do you want to start with that, Alexander? What does the world of NFTs and this domain look like to you 2 years' time?
I don't understand why we're talking about NFTs. NFTs are just a way for us to continue doing our relationships and continue living our virtual life and trades digital assets and continue doing marketing, continue selling art. So I think that in the same way that brands are onboarding now, they're all embracing this technology. We're going to see more celebrities engage. We're going to see more companies create franchises around different collections. We're going to see more onboarding. I mean, by now, I would say, like, I've been talking about this for the last 2 years, and I see that now I don't even have an example to give. I can't say, oh, PayPal will be next, because PayPal is already there and they already own an NFT. So, like, I think it's clear that the world has embraced it. The only shift that I think has to happen is for people who are feeling sort of on the outside looking at it from a very critical standpoint, they have to learn to either embrace it or step aside and let people who actually care build something. Because I think people who are so intrinsically critical, they are denying the efforts of those that are not doing rug pulls, because there are plenty of companies building meaningful projects, which are charitable projects, mental health projects, which are enabling opportunities for people and minorities who wouldn't be necessarily empowered. And like, being for the last week talking to all the digital artists in Ukraine who are literally the only source of income for their families right now, I definitely cannot say or answer this question, are NFTs a pyramid scheme? Because there is so much good, and it's just, I chose the side that tries to see the goods and empower the people and be of value. And I just hope that more people will choose a side that brings value rather than just tries to put sticks in wheels for others.
Dan, it would be great to hear your view, and then with Stephen, I'd love to go to my colleague Alexi at the back. Dan.
It is ethically irresponsible to separate NFTs, to compartmentalize them from cryptocurrency, which they are attached to, which they are built out of, and which is rooted in deflationary, air quote, sound money, John Birch Society philosophies about how economies should operate and who should possess and control the flow of wealth. I find a lot of the emotional arguments to be deeply uncompelling. I find them to be incomplete. I think the history or the future history of NFTs is one where it goes one of two ways. Either they fail to actually materialize into something even kind of vaguely functional and they just kind of go by the wayside as one more piece of digital detritus. or they're successful and they're actually a nightmare because the underlying philosophy of how they function, this tokenization of everything, turning all of these interactions into these tokenized valuated relationships and creating thousands and thousands of micro competing currencies with very limited, easily bricked functions is a nightmare. It's terrible. It's an awful interaction, and it's bad for society.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Dan. So, Stephen, it would be great to hear from you very, very briefly, and I'd love to go to Alexei at the back, and then, unfortunately, the flag's up, so.
Hey, Dan. So I'm Stephen Deal, actually, so I'm a big fan of yours, and I think your video is brilliant, actually. My question was, I see in this room tonight, there's kind of two different kind of realities that seem kind of completely incommensurate. And for those of us on like crypto skeptic side, a lot of us see this as like kind of a deeply predatory, kind of malicious market that exists mostly as kind of to sell fictitious commodities to greater fools. And like, how do we get through to the other side and kind of do collective sense making in the presence of all of this kind of massive amounts of disinformation and kind of incommensurate worldviews? And is that even possible?
Dan, if you can respond quickly, if you'd like, that would be great. And then,
It's an NFT event.
if we could get a mic to Alexei, that would be fantastic.
I can respond to that very quickly. I think that that's kind of $1 million answer, because if we had the language to cut through that easily, then we would be able to solve other predatory schemes. We'd be able to solve payday lending. Would be able to solve, pyramid schemes. Would be able to solve multi-level marketing. Would be able to solve like so many elements of financial predation that exist in our society. So I don't think that there isn't a lathe to just cut through that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Alexei. Hi.
Thank you. I mean, a lot of people, including Dan, have kind of made some of the points that I was going to make. But what I'm interested more than the kind of the technical side of NFTs is the kind of the political background behind them, especially with their connection to cryptocurrency. I mean, I think that cryptocurrency has not done well in the Ukraine conflict so far, right? When compared to more established financial institutions like Visa and MasterCard. I mean, you've got people like the Binance founder saying there's no way that we're going to limit crypto transactions with Russia. They've doubled down on their libertarian political foundations. And what I'm really interested in relation to NFTs is how that political philosophy bleeds across into what NFTs are and what NFTs should be, because art historically has had a very important place in and as a public good, as expressing something more than the desire of the artist to make money. So how does one idea that is very, very associated with cryptocurrency and that is arguably a very, very selfish principle transfer into an idea that traditionally has been about something much more than that?
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Please, we'd love to hear from you, but just keep it brief.
Just to answer that point, art has always been an emblem of society more than anything. So, art represents so art is a material structure that represents the society that it's working in. So Monet, as a physical object, represented all the social conditions of which it was created, which represented industrialization or post-industrialization in that specific moment. Picasso, with his kind of frivolous gestures, represented the post-World War II, World War I era. So art, by nature, always represents the moment that it's conceived in, and that's why I think digital art is so exciting. Because, in a very simple way, digital art represents our digital age, full stop. And then inevitably, we may be in a Web 2 or kind of more traditional mindset right now, but inevitably we're going to be at a point in 50, 100 years where the world is going to look completely different, and this is just the beginning of that.
Yeah. And
NFTs, I think, are the way of it's actually the founder of Dapper Labs, the guy who founded Bored Apes Club, right? He gave the most amazing summary of what NFTs are, and everyone should watch the YouTube video. But everybody wants to own something. Collectibles will always be around because ownership is intrinsic to who we are. And anyway, so that's why. I'm just rambling now.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yes, please do. Please do. Very briefly. Thank you.
I have a couple of things. So just a quick question to Dan and to you as well, who made that statement before. Have you purchased an NFT? Either one of you?
Have I?
Mm-hmm.
No, they're deeply unethical.
Right, but they're deeply unethical based off of like this really specific thought process, right? But from an artist's perspective, and also from a musician's perspective, which is also going to be a huge player in the NFT space, you know, songwriters are being absolutely destroyed on Spotify. They make zero money. But when I mean, yeah, it's a big problem if you look into like how much money songwriters make. The artists make a decent amount of money, but songwriters don't. When you look at the NFT, you know, processes that are being utilized for songwriters, for music, that's going to change the landscape of music and give it back to the artists. But also, Dan, have you ever purchased an NFT?
Okay, a couple things on that. So like the direct answer would be one, yes, yes, I have. I bought a couple tokens on Tezos while I was doing research for the video because I felt like it was, you know, due diligence to go like physically go through the entire onboarding process from beginning to end so that I had that it's like, okay, how many steps does it take for me to convert Canadian dollars into a token? Yeah, so I've done that so that I had a good, like a comprehensive picture of the entire like hands-on picture of the onboarding process. On the second, I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking in that, because if you look at the actual structure of the tokens and you say it's like, oh, this is giving power back to the audience, the artists, this is giving power back to the writers, that there's a lot of wishful thinking in that relies on basically this giant question mark that says no one institutional will interfere. Oh, like an artist will generate a you know, fan token that they'll distribute, and then that will somehow nebulously, basically like buying stock in the artists, it'll go up in value as they get more popular. And I saw this whole long Twitter thread on how it's like they're like a self-promoting asset. You're turning your audience into your promoters, but there's no mechanism in existence that would prevent somebody from just recreating a record label by buying up all of those artist tokens and owning like a 90% air quote share in that artist. So I think there very much needs to be addressed like actual questions about like, okay, but what if somebody institutional just comes in and interferes?
Well, the institutions are currently working to build platforms, but obviously there are platforms being currently erected similar to Spotify to give more rights to the artists. I know of 3 platforms just off the top of my head, but just circle back to the NFT question. So you've purchased NFTs on Tezos just to understand the concept, but have you engaged with the communities that are part of those NFT, you know, NFT like launches? Have you gone into the Discords? Have you talked to the artists? Have you really engaged in the process, or is this just like a perspective that you have just from what you've seen on Twitter and, you know, YouTube, basically?
Oh, I've spent hundreds of hours engaging in various NFT Discords.
Yeah, but have you purchased any of those specific NFTs that give you like token access?
No.
That's what I was curious about.
So what's your name?
Shayna.
Shayna,
Yeah.
thanks very much for your questions. What is it that you're trying to sort of get into with that?
He has a very cynical viewpoint on it all, and I've spent a lot of time in the space. That's actually how I met Alex, and I've seen so much positivity, and people, you know, have like incredibly successful projects, such incredible communities built, people who are, you know, creating jobs for one another. I mean, there's so much positivity that I've seen. It's really interesting to hear such a negative perspective from someone who hasn't really utilized, you know, different applications.
Yeah.
Or I think it's easy. I can see why someone would have that perspective. I actually had the same perspective until I was immersed in it and got to see a lot of the projects that were being built, spoke to a lot of the artists, and I think, you know, we were saying during the break, I think there's always going to be people who utilize a negative aspect of technology. That's never going to go away. That's human nature. But there's also so much positivity that can come from innovation, and to fight innovation is a losing battle ultimately. So why not figure out, as Alex said, the positive, you know, aspects? It just makes more sense, because it's not going away. From the projects that I know that are being built and the people that are involved, the biggest, the brightest, the most talented people that I'm currently aware of. So I think that says a lot about it.
Yeah, thank you. The fact is, I'm not going away. You use the word inevitable, and I think it's always interesting to think about the way that the word inevitable and inevitability gets used in these conversations, especially when we're sort of talking about what's going to happen in the future. I don't think I've ever seen such a civilized disagreement. And obviously that's the purpose of the thinking, but it feels to me like we have to try and reconcile what has been described by Dan and others as the sort of ideological debate around whether cryptocurrency is a valid way to try and drive the future of finance and economics. And I think that's why it was helpful to hear from Stephen, not just today, but also a few weeks ago when we were discussing more specifically the subject of Bitcoin. But also, I think if you can't reconcile whether you're in favor of that ideology of cryptocurrency as the future of money or not, it's very difficult to have a conversation about whether NFTs are valid, because as we've all said, admitted, they're intrinsically linked. They are one in the same thing, even if they function sometimes at a huge scale in terms of value and sometimes at a very small scale. I think we have to still, as a newsroom, be interested in the concepts that you raised right at the start, Georgie, on the proof of possession, investing in culture and the internet, and also to pay close attention to how these NFTs function with regards to scarcity or abundance, because I was interested, at least by Dan's provocation, that the scarcity is false, as are some of the other aspects of the market. The point, I think, around tokenizing everything and the relationships in future, I'm not quite sure I understood that from Dan, but it is important, I think, to follow up on what the end point for this NFT market state is. Does it stay with these sort of curious little squares, or does it become something in the future that's much more elaborate? We've seen digital land being bought, digital houses, and so there's much more potential for complexity there. But I don't think it's as simple as you said, Alexandra, that we either need to embrace or step aside. I think there are some real ethical challenges that people rightly raised, and that's something that we'll have to follow as a newsroom. It's just left to me to say thanks, everyone, for joining. Really grateful to Georgie, to Alexandra, and to Dan, and for everyone who's weighed in. I hope it was interesting. I've got a lot of work and thinking to do on it. Thanks.